Since President Donald Trump assumed office on January 20th, 2025, tensions between the U.S. and several countries have escalated. Shifting diplomatic ties, immigration policies, and travel restrictions have made some destinations less welcoming for Americans. Whether due to political disagreements, economic sanctions, or long-standing resentments, these nations might not be rolling out the red carpet for U.S. travelers anytime soon. In this video, 10 countries that won't welcome Americans in 2025. Here's why. We'll explore which countries Americans should think twice about visiting and the reasons behind these growing hostilities. From strict immigration policies to outright travel bans, these places may not be as friendly as they once were. If you're an American traveler, retiree, or expat considering moving abroad, this is crucial information you won't want to miss. Watch until the end to discover which countries are pushing back against American visitors and why. Let us know in the comments. Would you still visit these places? Before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and ring the notification bell for more travel updates, tips, and must-know global trends. Let's jump right in. Number 10. Panama. Panama, home to breathtaking beaches, lush rainforests, and of course, one very famous canal that the U.S. built, controlled, and eventually gave back. But now, in 2025, the buzz around reasserting American influence over the Panama Canal has reignited old tensions, and let's just say, Panamanians are not amused. Imagine you let a friend borrow your car for a few decades. They fixed it up, kept it running, and even made a fortune using it. Then, one day, they finally return it and say, okay, it's yours now. But just as you're enjoying your new ride, they come back and say, actually, I kind of miss it. Mind if I drive again? That's pretty much how Panamanians feel about recent U.S. murmurs regarding the canal. The Panama Canal, a 50-mile engineering marvel, was built by the U.S. in the early 1900s after France tried and failed miserably. Malaria and engineering miscalculations were not on their side. America swooped in, got it done, and then ran the whole show for nearly a century. It wasn't until 1999 that the U.S. officially handed it over to Panama. Cue fireworks, national pride, and a collective sigh of relief. Fast forward to today, and some American politicians are dropping hints that maybe, just maybe, the U.S. should get a little more involved in canal affairs again. Panama's response? A resounding nope. For starters, the canal is the country's golden goose. It generates billions of dollars and fuels the economy. Panama doesn't need a babysitter. But beyond money, there's also pride, sovereignty, and the simple fact that nobody likes an ex who won't move on. In early 2025, thousands of Panamanians flooded the streets in protest, waving signs that basically boiled down to, "Keep your hands off our canal." Many see this as just another example of American interference, and honestly, they're kind of tired of it. Tourism? Still booming. But if you're an American traveler who brings up reclaiming the canal at a bar, good luck getting served. What this means for American visitors. Panama isn't banning Americans, but let's just say the vibe isn't as warm as the tropical weather. If you're planning a visit, maybe don't mention the canal unless you want a history lesson with a side of passive-aggressive stares. So, if you're an American thinking about retiring on a beautiful Panamanian beach or enjoying some duty-free shopping in Cologne, go for it. But maybe leave your "Make the Canal American Again" hat at home. Number 9. Turkey. Turkey, where East meets West, where you can sip Turkish coffee so strong it could wake the dead, and where Americans might currently be as popular as soggy baklava. So what happened? Why has Turkey, a country known for its rich history, stunning landscapes, and legendary hospitality, suddenly grown less enthusiastic about hosting American tourists? Well, let's just say that NATO disputes, arms deals, and a little place called Syria have all contributed to some not-so-friendly vibes between the two nations. For years, the US and Turkey have been like two frenemies in a reality TV show, smiling for the cameras but constantly plotting against each other backstage. Turkey is a key NATO member and technically an ally, but lately Washington and Ankara have been butting heads like two rams on a mountain pass. One of the biggest sources of drama? Arms deals. Turkey decided to buy Russia's S-400 missile defense system, which, in the world of international politics, is basically the equivalent of Turkey showing up to NATO's party wearing a rival team's jersey. The US was not amused and promptly booted Turkey out of the F-35 fighter jet program. Turkey, in turn, doubled down, strengthening ties with Russia, which is not exactly what NATO had in mind. And then there's Syria. The US backed Kurdish fighters there, who Turkey considers a major threat. They see them as terrorists, the US sees them as allies. This little disagreement has created tensions sharper than a fresh kebab knife. Now, let's be real. Turkey isn't banning Americans, but the general vibe toward US tourists isn't exactly glowing. It's like showing up to Thanksgiving after a family feud. People might still feed you, but don't expect extra gravy. In major tourist spots like Istanbul, Cappadocia, and Antalya, Americans might still be welcomed with a smile. But if you wander into a political discussion, expect some heated opinions and maybe a side-eye or two. Anti-American protests have been popping up more frequently, and locals are growing increasingly vocal about US foreign policies. Visiting Turkey offers a rich experience, from exploring vibrant bazaars and stunning mosques to indulging in mouth-watering cuisine like doner kebabs. However, to avoid awkward encounters, steer clear of discussing US military operations or Turkey's role in NATO unless you're prepared for spirited debates. While bargaining is expected at places like the Grand Bazaar, keep the negotiations focused on prices, not politics. Finally, resist the urge to casually mention a potential move to Turkey, as the response might not be as welcoming as you'd hope. So, if you're an American with Turkey on your 2025 travel list, go for the history, the landscapes, and the food. Just maybe don't bring up the arms deals over dinner. Number 8. Venezuela. Venezuela, a country with some of the world's largest oil reserves, breathtaking landscapes, and political drama that makes reality TV look tame. While it could have been an economic powerhouse, years of turmoil, inflation rates that require a calculator to keep up with, and, oh yeah, US sanctions have made Venezuela one of the least welcoming places for Americans in 2025. Once upon a time, Venezuela and the US were business buddies, especially when it came to oil. But things started going south faster than a tourist who realizes Caracas is not the place for a casual evening stroll. Here's the quick and dirty version. The US opposes President Nicolás Maduro's government, calling his elections sketchier than a back-alley car deal. The US slapped sanctions on Venezuela, saying Maduro's government was corrupt and oppressive. Maduro responded by blaming the US for Venezuela's economic collapse, because, of course, it's always easier to point fingers than fix problems. The result? A full-blown we don't like American situation. The US has placed so many sanctions on Venezuela that at this point, it's practically a sport. Oil exports? Blocked. Banking access? Frozen. Maduro's officials? Blacklisted. These moves were meant to pressure the Venezuelan government into reform, but instead, it just made life harder for regular Venezuelans, who now deal with food shortages, power outages, and inflation that makes monopoly money look stable. And guess who gets the blame? Yep, the good old US of A. Even if you, personally, have nothing to do with foreign policy, just carrying a blue passport might get you a few dirty looks, or worse, a Yankee go-home shout from across the street. Aside from the anti-American sentiment, Venezuela isn't exactly a dream destination for tourists right now. The country's economy is in shambles, crime rates are sky-high, and let's just say walking around with an iPhone might not end well. Even Maduro himself advised citizens to farm in their backyards to deal with food shortages, so you can imagine how the tourism industry is doing. If, for some reason, you still feel like Venezuela is your next vacation stop, here's what to expect. Money problems. The Venezuelan bolivar is about as valuable as a used napkin, and ATMs? Good luck finding one that works. Security concerns. Caracas is often ranked as one of the most dangerous cities in the world. You don't want to be the American who finds out why. Locals aren't thrilled about US tourists. You probably won't get chased out with pitchforks, but let's just say customer service isn't going to roll out the red carpet. While Venezuela has incredible beaches, stunning mountains, and delicious arepas, the combination of economic chaos, political instability, and anti-American sentiment makes it one of the least welcoming countries for US travelers in 2025. unless you're into adventure tourism with a side of geopolitical tension, maybe save this trip for someday. Number 7. Denmark. Denmark, the land of Vikings, world-class pastries, and a monarchy that somehow still gets respect. A place where people ride bikes more than they drive. Hygge, coziness, is a lifestyle, and the biggest national controversy usually involves whether or not to put remoulade on a hot dog. But lately, there's been one much bigger controversy causing eye rolls across Denmark: America's ongoing obsession with buying Greenland. Remember when Donald Trump casually suggested buying Greenland back in 2019? Yeah, that went over about as well as showing up to a Danish dinner party and asking for ketchup on your smørrebrød. Denmark was absolutely baffled. Greenland politely laughed it off, and the world got a new geopolitical meme. The Danish Prime Minister at the time, Mette Frederiksen, even called it absurd, which is polite political talk for, have you lost your mind? Fast forward to 2025, and guess what? The conversation is back. Some US politicians have revived the idea, talking about Greenland's strategic importance, untapped natural resources, and proximity to the Arctic. But Denmark? They are not amused. Denmark doesn't mind hosting American tourists. They'll gladly sell you Lego sets, Viking souvenirs, and overpriced lattes in Copenhagen. But when it comes to Greenland, they're sick and tired of hearing about it. To put it in perspective, imagine your neighbor keeps hinting that they'd love to buy your backyard, even though it's not for sale, and, oh yeah, your cousin lives there. That's exactly how Denmark feels about the US and Greenland. Denmark owns Greenland. Yes, Greenland is technically autonomous, but it's still part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Greenlanders are not interested. They've got their own government, culture, and economy, and they're not looking for a new landlord. It's getting annoying. Danish officials have repeatedly shut down the idea, but the US keeps bringing it back like an unwanted sequel. Denmark isn't banning Americans, but let's just say the Danish patience is wearing thin. If you visit in 2025, here are some pro tips for avoiding awkward situations. When visiting Denmark, embrace the local culture by complimenting their delicious pastries, admiring the beauty of the Tivoli Gardens, and seeking recommendations for scenic bike routes. However, avoid the faux pas of casually inquiring about the price of Greenland, as this is likely to be met with a frosty and disapproving silence. Oh, and if you find yourself in Greenland, just enjoy the icy landscapes and local culture. But don't ask about future real estate listings. Because if there's one thing that will turn a warm Danish welcome into an ice-cold rejection, it's bringing up America's dream of a Greenland takeover. Number 6. Germany. Germany, land of bratwurst, precision engineering, and beer served in mugs so big they double as workout equipment. If there's one place that knows how to blend history, efficiency, and a good time, it's Deutschland. But while Americans have long enjoyed strolling through Berlin's hipster cafes, admiring Bavaria's fairy tale castles, and pretending they can handle a full stein of beer at Oktoberfest, the political temperature in 2025 is as cold as a Bavarian winter. Why? Well, let's just say that when it comes to Trump's foreign policy, NATO stance, and trade negotiations, Germany isn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for US tourists. For years, Trump has criticized Germany for not spending enough on NATO defense, claiming the US is footing too much of the bill. Imagine splitting a group dinner with friends, and one guy, let's call him Donald, keeps saying, "Why am I paying for your extra bratwurst?" That's basically how Trump sees Germany's NATO contributions. Germans, on the other hand, aren't too thrilled about being scolded like a kid who didn't do their homework. They argue that their military spending is their own business, and that maybe, just maybe, America should focus on its own problems first. The result? Tensions between Berlin and Washington have been simmering like a pot of sauerbraten. Then there's the trade dispute. Trump has thrown around threats of tariffs on German cars, claiming that BMWs and Mercedes are flooding the US market and hurting American manufacturers. Germans, of course, find this ridiculous because, let's be honest, nobody's replacing their Benz with a Ford Pinto. This kind of economic tension has led to a growing frustration with US policies, and that frustration sometimes spills over into how locals feel about American visitors. Germany has long been a leader in progressive immigration policies, while Trump's stance on immigration is, well, The complete opposite. Many Germans see his policies as xenophobic, and this divide has only widened in 2025. While Germans are generally polite, don't be surprised if political conversations at the beer hall suddenly get awkward. Now, don't panic. Germany isn't banning Americans. You can still visit, and yes, you can still get your Oktoberfest fix. But expect more side-eyes, fewer friendly conversations, and maybe an extra long wait time at the passport control line. A trip to Germany offers the chance to experience magnificent castles, cruise along the autobahns, and relax in traditional beer gardens. However, it's best to avoid initiating conversations with the phrase, "Trump was right about NATO," as this is likely to spark heated debate and detract from your enjoyment of the German experience. In short, Germany is still a great place to visit, just maybe don't bring up politics unless you want your schnitzel served with a side of passive aggression. Wait, are these countries surprising you? We're only halfway through the list, and some of these places might not have been what you expected. But trust me, the top 5 will shock you even more. What do you think so far? Drop a comment below. Would you still visit any of these countries, or are they officially off your bucket list? And if you're enjoying this deep dive into where Americans aren't exactly welcome in 2025, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on more travel insights, trends, and tips. All right, let's get back into it. The next country on this list has some serious reasons for giving American tourists the cold shoulder. Number 5, France. France, the land of croissants, romance, world-class art, and a general attitude that says, "We were doing culture before you even existed." Americans have long had a love-hate relationship with France. We love their food, their fashion, and their countryside, but we also can't help but notice the occasional eye roll when we ask if they speak English. Well, in 2025, that eye roll has turned into a full-blown side-eye. The French have always been known for their je ne sais quoi level of snobbishness toward tourists, but now, thanks to diplomatic tensions over NATO, climate change, and trade policies, Americans might find themselves receiving less bienvenue and more s'il vous plaît, go away. One of the biggest points of tension between France and the US right now is, you guessed it, NATO funding. Trump has never been shy about calling out European nations for not pulling their weight when it comes to military spending. And let's just say, France doesn't appreciate being lectured. From their perspective, they're an independent global power, and let's be honest, they love reminding people of that. So when the US throws shade about defense budgets, France's response is basically, "Oh, you think we need you to defend us?" Adorable. If there's one thing that really grinds France's gears, it's America's on-again, off-again relationship with climate policy. The French take environmental issues very seriously, and Trump's history of downplaying climate change, withdrawing from agreements, and prioritizing fossil fuels hasn't exactly won him any fans in Paris. Now don't get me wrong, France still loves selling wine and designer handbags to Americans, but when it comes to political conversations, expect a lot of thinly veiled insults, disguised as intellectual debate. If you're planning a trip to France this year, good news, you'll still be able to take your Instagram selfies at the Eiffel Tower, stroll through the Louvre, and enjoy a freshly baked baguette. The bad news? You might find that service in restaurants has gotten even slower, especially if you're an American who asks for ketchup with your steak. When visiting France, immerse yourself in the rich culture, make an effort to speak even basic French, and appreciate the breathtaking landscapes. However, avoid discussing topics like Trump, NATO, or climate change unless you're prepared for an extended and potentially critical discourse on perceived American contributions to global issues. France isn't banning Americans, but let's just say the attitude toward US visitors in 2025 is frostier than a glass of chilled champagne. If you're visiting, stick to the food, the fashion, and the views, and maybe avoid deep political conversations with your waiter. Number 4. Canada. Canada, America's polite northern neighbor, the land of maple syrup, hockey fights, and people who apologize when you bump into them. If there's one country Americans have always assumed would welcome them with open arms, it's Canada. After all, they look like us, talk almost like us, and they even let us film half our Hollywood movies in Vancouver. But here's the thing. Canadians are over it. Thanks to trade disputes, climate disagreements, and a few less than flattering comments from Trump about Canada's leadership, our friendly neighbors have decided that maybe they'd rather just hang out with Europe for a bit. Canada has always been America's biggest trading partner, but lately things have gotten about as tense as a Thanksgiving dinner debate about politics. Trump has been threatening tariffs on Canadian exports, including steel, aluminum, and maple syrup, claiming that the US is getting a bad deal. Canadians, being the masters of passive aggressiveness, responded by slapping their own tariffs on American products, including ketchup and bourbon, which honestly just feels like a personal attack. If there's one thing Canadians take seriously, it's their pristine nature. The forests, the lakes, the fact that a moose can casually walk into your backyard. So when Trump backed out of climate agreements and downplayed environmental concerns, Canada was not impressed. While Americans are busy debating whether climate change is even real, Canada is out here literally watching their glaciers melt. They see the US as the loud, messy neighbor who keeps throwing trash over the fence, and quite frankly, they're tired of cleaning up the mess. Then, of course, there's the Justin Trudeau situation. Trump has had some not-so-kind words for the Canadian Prime Minister over the years, and while Trudeau has taken the high road, Canadians have not forgotten. If there's one thing they're not cool with, it's Americans disrespecting their leader. Now don't get me wrong, Canada isn't banning Americans, but let's just say the vibe at the border might feel a little off. When in Canada, politeness and respect for nature are key. Don't hesitate to compliment their healthcare system. However, it's best to avoid discussing topics like Trump, tariffs, or expressing lukewarm opinions about Tim Hortons coffee, as these are likely to be met with disapproval or even offense. Canada will still take your tourist dollars, but the days of effortless warmth and maple-scented hugs might be on hold. If you visit in 2025, expect a little less friendliness, and maybe a few extra, random security checks at the border. Number 3. Mexico. Mexico, where Americans go for cheap margaritas, stunning beaches, and dental work that costs less than a trip to the ER back home. Whether it's the tacos, tequila, or Tulum's Instagram-worthy ruins, Mexico has long been one of the top destinations for US tourists. But in 2025, things are a little awkward. Thanks to renewed immigration crackdowns, more talk of expanding the wall, and a fresh batch of trade disputes, Mexico isn't exactly feeling the love. And if you think Americans are the only ones who can play the keep 'em out game, think again. For years, Mexico has been the go-to political punching bag when it comes to US immigration policies. Trump's Build the Wall campaign was already not a great icebreaker, and now, in 2025, talks of expanding border security and deportation policies are making things even more tense. Mexicans are looking at American tourists crossing into Cancun for spring break like, "Oh, so now you want to come over? Interesting." Mexico is one of the US's biggest trading partners, and when America starts playing hardball with tariffs and trade agreements, Mexicans don't take it lightly. If you notice that your all-inclusive resort in Cabo just got a little pricier, you can probably thank economic tensions. In response to US trade disputes, Mexico has started reassessing its own business deals. And, let's be real, nobody wants a world where avocados are more expensive. Nobody. Now, here's where it gets really real. Mexicans are proud of their country, their culture, and their people. But some American tourists, not you, obviously, have been known to act like Mexico is one big all-you-can-drink buffet, forgetting that actual people live there who might not be thrilled about how their country is treated by US policies. So don't be surprised if, in 2025, the welcome isn't quite as warm, especially if you show up acting entitled, demanding English menus, or referring to Mexico City as Cabo. Mexico isn't banning Americans, but the mood has changed. Expect longer lines at customs, a little less patience for loud tourists, and maybe a few extra side eyes when you ask for ketchup with your tacos. When visiting Mexico, immerse yourself in the vibrant culture, be generous with tips, and make an effort to speak at least some basic Spanish. However, avoid discussing border security, making excessive demands for limes, or referring to tequila as Mexican vodka, as these are likely to be considered insensitive or culturally inappropriate. Mexico will still let you sip your piña colada by the beach, but don't expect locals to be as thrilled about your visit as they were a pre-border feud. The tacos are still delicious, but the side of resentment? That's new. Number 2. Iran. If there were ever a country's least likely to host an American tourist convention list, Iran would probably be at the top. This isn't exactly a new thing. US-Iran relations have been rockier than a camel ride through the desert for decades. But in 2025, let's just say your chances of getting a warm welcome in Tehran are about as high as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Why? Well, it's a long story, but here's the short version. Sanctions, nuclear deal drama, and a whole lot of bad blood. Back in the day, 2015, the US and Iran struck a nuclear deal that basically said Iran would chill out on the nuclear program. The US would ease up on the economic sanctions. It was kind of like a ceasefire in a bad breakup. Not perfect, but at least they were talking. Then came Trump, who took one look at the agreement and said, nah, we're out. Cue sanctions, economic collapse, and a very, very unhappy Iran. Tehran has since made it crystal clear that the US is not exactly on its holiday card list. Let's be honest. The US and sanctions go together like peanut butter and jelly. If the American government doesn't like you, they'll block your economy faster than a bouncer at an exclusive club. For Iran, this has meant crippling economic restrictions on everything from oil exports to banking. And since 2025 has brought even more pressure from Washington, Iranians aren't exactly feeling the warm fuzzies toward American visitors. Imagine if your neighbor kept cutting off your Wi-Fi, drained your bank account, and told all your friends not to do business with you. Would you invite them over for dinner? Didn't think so. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Technically, Americans can visit Iran, but in 2025, you'd probably have an easier time getting a backstage pass to a Beyoncé concert. For starters, no visa on arrival. You need a special permit and, oh yeah, the US and Iran don't even have an embassy for you to apply at. Your government is on Iran's We're Watching You list. You might get mistaken for a spy. No, seriously. Iran has a history of detaining US citizens on espionage charges. Even if you miraculously get a visa, expect constant surveillance, restricted movement, and a whole lot of awkward conversations. When visiting Iran, it's best to steer clear of political discussions, show respect for local customs, and, if needed, even jokingly claim Canadian nationality. Under no circumstances should you mention Trump, inquire about nuclear weapons, or make comments about democracy, as these topics are highly sensitive and could lead to uncomfortable or even risky situations. Iran has incredible history, stunning architecture, and some of the best food on the planet. But in 2025, if you're an American, you might want to admire it from Google Earth. Let's just say now is not the time for that Persian vacation you were dreaming of. Number 1. China. And finally, we've reached the grand finale. China, the number 1 country that won't be rolling out the red carpet for Americans in 2025. If there were an Olympics for strained international relations, the US and China would be going for gold every year. The tension between these two superpowers is so thick you could build a Great Wall out of it. And while tourists used to flock to Beijing's Forbidden City, these days it seems like the whole country is becoming a forbidden zone for Americans. Let's start with the obvious: trade disputes. For years, the US and China have been slapping tariffs on each other like two kids fighting over the last slice of pizza. One side raises tariffs, the other side retaliates, and the cycle continues like a bad soap opera. China has already tightened restrictions on American businesses, and in response, the US has done things like banning TikTok again, and making life harder for Chinese tech companies. Now, tell me, if someone kept messing with your business, blocking your investments, and accusing you of spying, would you welcome them into your house for tea? Didn't think so. If trade wars weren't enough, there's also the South China Sea standoff. The US and China have been flexing their military muscles in the region, with both sides acting like they own the place. China has been building islands with military bases, and the US keeps sending warships through just to say, hey, we're still here. Needless to say, this has not exactly warmed diplomatic relations. China and the US are also in a full-scale tech war. The US has been blocking China's access to high-end chips, China has been kicking out American apps, and both sides accuse each other of spying. And guess what? This doesn't exactly make the locals excited to welcome American tourists. If the government sees the US as an enemy, don't expect the average person to be handing you a free dumpling. When visiting China, it's important to respect local customs, feign ignorance of world politics, and perhaps even brush up on your Mandarin. However, avoid mentioning sensitive topics like Hong Kong, Taiwan, TikTok bans, or revealing your continued use of Google, as these are likely to be met with disapproval or could even lead to more serious consequences. At this point, traveling to China as an American is about as fun as a pop quiz on quantum physics. Expect longer visa processing times, more surveillance, and an overall "why are you even here" vibe. If China was ever on your 2025 bucket list, you might want to pencil it in for another decade. Between trade fights, military tensions, and digital Cold War vibes, this is one trip that's probably not worth the trouble. And there you have it, the 10 countries that won't welcome Americans in 2025. Whether it's politics, sanctions, military tensions, or just plain resentment, these places are making it loud and clear that they're not exactly excited to see US tourists walking through customs. So, what do you think? Did any of these surprise you? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this list, hit that like button and subscribe for more global insights. Because trust me, with the way things are going, this might not be the last time we talk about travel bans.